Welcome to Daily Dose of Aramaic Grammar Lessons, Lesson 3, Particles. And this is Part 2, in which we will talk about conjunctions. More information on this subject can be found in Biblical Aramaic for Biblical Interpreters, pages 8 to 13. Let's get started. First, let's talk about coordinating conjunctions. Coordinating conjunctions connect elements of equal syntactical importance within sentences. And what do we mean? Well, to latch onto that concept, there's a handy list of these kind of ideas in English with an acronym. Fanboys, that is to say for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. These English ideas. So if you want to, you can use that acronym to remember these ideas and help to conceptualize what it means to link elements of equal syntactical importance in a sentence. But instead of considering English translational equivalents, we want to look at Aramaic. So let's turn to that right now. These ideas we know from our study of Hebrew often get expressed with the vav conjunction. Let's start with the non-contrasting coordinating conjunction with sort of an and idea. Here's an example in Ezra 6:10, that they may bring pleasing sacrifices to the God of heaven and pray for the king and his sons. And that and is expressed right after the atnach. And we see in this case it has the shurik vav form because it not only comes before a mem, but also a vocal shavah, just as in Hebrew. So, and, the non-contrasting idea that we often see with vav in Hebrew, we also see with vav in Aramaic. Well, what else can vav do? There's also an alternative use, which is to say, in Daniel 3:29, any people, nation, or language that should speak against their God. We can see that people, nation, and language is a list that is not supposed to be sort of the same idea as and. Any people, nation, and language that should speak against their God is not as natural an understanding as an alternative use here with or. And we see that the form of this vav is vav with the vocal shavah at the beginning of a word, all as expected from our Hebrew studies. So far we've talked about non-contrasting and, alternative or, and now we move to the contrasting but idea, also expressed with a vav. Let's look at Daniel 5:8. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they were not able to read the writing in order to proclaim and make known the interpretation to the king. Also, this vav right after an atnach. This makes sense. I suppose we could read, then all the king's men came in and they were not able to read the writing. A natural way of thinking this in English is, well, wise men should have been able to read this writing. After all, it appears to have been written in Aramaic, right? So why couldn't they? Well, but they were not able to read the writing is a natural reading in English. So if there is a contrast that the interpreter picks up here, a contrasting but idea also makes sense for vav. So we've seen non-contrasting and, alternative or contrasting but as examples of the vav coordinating conjunction use. That's not to say that vav is the only coordinating conjunction. Here's another contrasting but conjunction. But there is a God in the heavens, Baram. And there's a similar coordinating conjunction with a contrasting idea of however or but, lahain. So in our discussion of the use of conjunctions in Aramaic, we don't intend to list off every single conjunction, but just to raise awareness of the different kinds so that as we're doing our interpretation, we interpret these conjunctions rightly. So we'll look at the most used conjunctions. But let's pause for a moment in our looking at conjunctions, because it's also possible to have a coordinating conjunctive idea without coordinating conjunctions. And this is asyndeton, coordination without conjunctions. And here's an example in Ezra 5:15. Take, go, and put them in the temple that is in Jerusalem. And these are the three verbs right there at the beginning of this sentence, all the way to the atnach in Ezra 5:15. Now we notice there is no conjunction that's the equivalent of the English and in this sentence. That is because these three verbs just get placed next to each other in an asyndetic relationship, no conjunctions. Normally, a syndeton in biblical Aramaic implies a logical chain of consequences. So these items, well, first one must take them. That's the first verb. Then one must carry them, must go, and then thirdly, put them in the temple that is in Jerusalem. So there's very much this logical flow between action 1, 2, and 3 in this list. And there are other cases of asyndeton in biblical Aramaic, coordination without conjunctions. But let's go back to conjunctions now. Subordinating conjunctions. Conditional if idea. Ezra 5:17, if it seems good to the king. Hain. Now this would be a false cognate in Hebrew, right? Because there's no behold kind of attention-getting discourse marker idea here. This is the word for if it seems good to the king. And we see that this is subordinating because subordinating conjunctions link a dependent clause to an independent clause. There is a clause of lesser syntactic importance that's being linked through a subordinating conjunction. That's the idea. Well, there's also a cause and effect because expression. And it's actually built out of more than one word type. So in Daniel 2:24, we read, because of this, Daniel went to Ariach. Okay. The first word we recognize as all. So where's that in our translation? It turns out that this all before kind of expression, the actual meaning of it is this subordinating conjunction, cause and effect, linkage, because kind of idea. And this actually appears rather frequently in biblical Aramaic. So this is an expression we should just learn and understand is a subordinating conjunction. Now, the last subordinating conjunction that I want to talk about supplies further information in a that kind of way. Daniel 4:23, that you may know that heaven rules. There are actually two of them. Now, an interesting thing about this subordinating conjunction, and that's indisputably what's going on here, is that this is actually, this D word, is the relative clause marker in Aramaic. So if you do a morphological search with your advanced Bible software, it will give you a hit, actually two hits, in Daniel 4:23. However, that is not the function of the word D in Daniel 4:23. Here it is acting like that, somewhat like the Hebrew subordinating conjunction ki, kaf, hirik, yod. So this is interesting. If you do morphological searching in advanced Bible software, this looks like a relative clause marker in these sentences, even though it certainly is not. So you would need to do syntactical searching with your advanced Bible software to line up this use with its use as a subordinating conjunction. So this is not only, I would say, a caution about the use of advanced Bible software, but also a reason to advocate not surrendering one's critical thinking to a computer, in that we need to know how to use computers rightly. The computer is reading text as a computer, not as a human. So we want to not give up our critical thinking ability. We want to maintain a syntactical focus in our reading. We want to read diagnostically, figuring out what is in front of us as a means of human communication within the customary rules of grammar and syntax. And this is a fitting place to end this part, because next we'll be speaking much more about D, the relative clause marker, in part 3. But for now, this has been part 2, Conjunctions, in lesson 3. I look forward to seeing you in the next part.